From the heart of Nebraska's capital city, this is the Nebraska Family Alliance Report. Here's your host, Nate Groz.
Welcome to another episode of the NFA Report, where we discuss the critical issues of faith, family, and freedom impacting Nebraska and our nation. And as we have celebrated America's 250th anniversary, there is a renewed and vital debate over the foundational principles that build our country and how they are treated by our legal system today. We are honored to welcome back a champion for religious liberty and the rule of law in Nebraska for a really special conversation, our former Attorney General and State Treasurer, Don Stenberg. General Stenberg, thank you so much for being with us.
Happy to be here, Nate. Thank you.
Well, we're honored to have you. And General Stenberg, I know that you have written and spoken extensively about how the Declaration of Independence is really fundamentally built on what you refer to as the laws of nature and of nature's God. What does the United States Declaration of Independence say to us still today about God and government, and why is it so important?
Well, I think the Declaration of Independence, number one, clearly demonstrates the strong religious faith of the men who signed that document and basically ties together government and religion in just a few sentences. So there's several principles set out in the Declaration of Independence. The first is, as you said, quote, the laws of nature and of nature's God, that's a quote from the Declaration of Independence, are what entitle a people to form their own government. That is, God gives people the right to have their own government. The second principle in the Declaration of Independence is, quote, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is, the Declaration of Independence says clearly God created us, and that it's God that gives us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the third principle in the Declaration of Independence is that the purpose of government is to secure our God-given rights. That is, as the Declaration says, quote, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, close quote. And at the end of the Declaration of Independence, the signers said this, quote, a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, close quote. So men who did not have a strong religious faith would not have written these statements. And basically, the Declaration clearly ties our government and religion together.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you look at what the Declaration of Independence actually says, and as you said, how it ties government and religion together. And yet for so long, it feels like we've been told that those two things, religion and government, have to be separate. You know, in fact, for decades, really, our legal system and public education system and really just the public psyche in the United States has been so heavily influenced by the concept of the wall of separation between church and state. That's been used really to discourage or to outright prohibit faith and references to religion from government and from the public square. How did we drift so far from the original intent of our founders who openly supported and encouraged the Christian faith?
Well, it's relatively a recent development that came about, for the most part, starting in the Warren Court. So let me comment on a couple of things. Number one, about this wall of separation between church and state. Former Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist addressed this issue, and I'd like to quote him briefly here. The Chief Justice said, quote, the wall of separation between church and state is a metaphor based on bad history, a metaphor that has proved useless as a guide to judging. It should be frankly and explicitly abandoned. The greatest injury of the wall notion is its mischievous diversion of judges from the actual intention of the drafters of the Bill of Rights, close quote. For more than 150 years, actually close to 180 years of our history, it was generally understood that religion in general, Christianity in particular, ought to receive encouragement from the state Back then, the people's understanding of the First Amendment to the Constitution was that government could give special aid to religion, so long as there was no discrimination between religious sects. The idea was that government could support religion so long as no single church was officially established, and the government did not deny any citizens the right of free exercise of religion. And if we have a couple minutes, one of the phrases now in the media so much is said without evidence, said without evidence. But in fact, there is tremendous amount of evidence of the interaction and support of religion by government. One example of that is from 1833, written by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, who wrote commentaries on the Constitution that's still regarded as extremely accurate. And he said this, quote, "Probably at the time of the adoption of the Constitution and of the amendment to it now under consideration, that is the First Amendment, the general, if not universal, sentiment in America was that Christianity ought to receive encouragement from the state so far as was not incompatible with private rights of conscience and the freedom of religious worship. An attempt to level all religions and to make it a matter of state policy to hold all in utter indifference would have created universal disapprobation, if not universal indignation," unquote. So that was what Supreme Court Justice was saying in 1833. And then more recently, well, still quite a while ago, in 1892, in a very important case, Holy Trinity Church versus the United States, the court reviewed in great detail the history of the support of religion by the government of the United States and of the several states. And let me do just one brief quote from that case. The court said this, "If we examine the constitutions of the various states, we find them in constant recognition of religious obligations. Every constitution of every one of the 44 states contains language which either directly or by clear implication recognizes a profound reverence for religion and an assumption that its influence in all human affairs is essential to the well-being of the community," unquote. So that's another example that the government was very much involved in supporting, not imposing, but supporting religious belief and the freedom of religion.
Yeah, I mean, try as people might, you really cannot separate our country and the founding of our country from religion and God and Christianity. And as you mentioned, there's been a kind of a shifting legal landscape, but more recently, in the last few years, thankfully, there's been several really important decisions in favor of religious freedom and those ideals and principles that our nation was founded on, including a case a few years ago involving a football coach at a public school who was prohibited from praying before football games that reached all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Can you walk us through why that case with Coach Kennedy and what the court decided was so significant and such a game changer for protecting religious freedom in our schools and communities?
Yeah, that was the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District case. And from 1962, and basically almost until the Kennedy case was decided in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court had used a test called the Lemon test, which we don't have time to go into a lot of detail. But basically, using that test, pretty much any reference in religion in any school district, for example, was pretty much going to be found unconstitutional. So in the Kennedy case, the court changed all that. And what they said was that instead of using the old Lemon test, that the court would decide Establishment Clause cases on the basis of reference to historical practices and understandings. And that is hugely important because, as we've already talked about, historically, there has been a lot of government support for religion. And the Supreme Court is now pointing back to that direction where a lot more freedom and opportunity to have religion recognized and supported, again, without imposing religion, but being supportive of having religion in the context of our public square and public schools and so on.
Yeah, and that was a huge case to see the Supreme Court reach that conclusion and to get rid of the lemon test that for so long had been used against religion and really against religious freedom. And there's a difference between the state, forcing a religion or beliefs on people versus, respecting people's individual right to religious freedom to be able to practice and live out their faith openly and freely, including in the public square. And it's really that understanding, going back to the Declaration of Independence, that recognition that there is a higher authority, that there is a creator, and that our rights come from God, not from government, that has separated our nation really from every other country on earth. And so, now as we look ahead to the future of our state and nation, what encouragement would you give to Nebraska parents and teachers and church leaders on how they can confidently stand up for their faith and for the religious heritage of our country?
Well, that's a great question. Number one, the case we just talked about as we move into the future, I think is going to be hugely helpful to religious freedom and to restricting the government from interfering with the practice of religion, for example, so that a recent case in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the posting of the Ten Commandments in every school district in the state of Texas. I think that case will probably go to the U.S. Supreme Court and will be upheld, probably in a 6-3 vote. So that just, 100 years ago, the posting of the Ten Commandments in every school district in the state of Texas or any other state would have gone almost without notice, because mostly they were already doing prayers to open the school day. As recently as 1962, the state of New York had a non-denominational school class in the state of New York. So I think we're seeing a big change here on the Supreme Court's view of that. And I think we're seeing state legislatures in many states starting to take advantage of that. There's some legislation on Bible readings and so forth. And frankly, just a consideration of the actual history of our state would necessarily involve the presentation of a lot of religious concept in the public schools just by itself.
Yeah, there's so much that will be at stake, but some great opportunities still ahead, especially for the Supreme Court to continue to affirm and uphold religious freedom, as you talked about, as the Declaration makes clear that government exists to secure our rights, not to create them and not to take them away. And each of us has the opportunity to continue to work towards that endeavor to protect religious freedom for the next generation. And so, General Stenberg, it has been a privilege for us to get to have you and to learn from your wisdom and expertise. So thank you for being with us, and more importantly, for your work and leadership to protect our most cherished freedoms.
Well, God bless Nebraska Family Alliance for the great work that they do, and I'll pray for your continued success.